Hello, I'm Mast, and I'm a Smash player from Victoria, Australia, and I'm going to be talking about note-taking in this video. And I'll be covering things, how to take notes in-game, out of game, how to take notes in general, and how to really gain a lot of use, or, how to effectively take away from note-taking. So just to preface, I'm not some kind of god. I'm just some guy who happens to find success in note-taking in the development of his play. And I want to kind of bring that to the board because I feel like it's something that's really underutilized in the meta of trying to learn stuff. And yeah, it's just a discussion. You don't have to immediately take this and be like, this is how I'm going to improve from now on. It's just some ideas I've got. So, firstly, in-game note-taking, right? What happens? I've got a notepad in front of me, this bad boy. We play a bit of Smash Brothers and I flip it open and I scribble some stuff in. So what's happening here? Well, firstly, I feel like it is really good for active thinking in that, tell me if this is you, all right? You're sitting in game, you're playing against this Falco and they're fairing you a bunch and you're like, God damn, I keep getting hit by this fair over and over again. And so the game ends, you open your notebook, you write in, try to find or stop getting hit by fair. You keep getting hit by fair. And so as soon as you close that notebook, go into the next game, what are you going to be thinking about? Of course you're going to be thinking about Falco fair. I mean, you just wrote it in. And that's why it's so good, because it brings focus, right? What you're going to write down in that notebook is exactly what you're going to be thinking about heading into the next game, because it's so easy for us to autopilot and not think about anything at all. The amount of times I can recall sets where I'm just completely blanked and fatigued out of my mind and not taking any grievances for the decision making I'm undergoing during the set. It happens too often, but this kind of reels you back in and pulls you into the game by just allowing you to focus and think about what you're writing, because that does take effort. So that's all well and good. You write about stuff that happens in the game. But with that information, you can also review the game. Because writing about your problems or the things that happen during a set while you're playing the set kind of acts as a chunk of evidence, physical evidence, for you to review, right? Once the game's over, you have your thought process written down as you were playing the set. And that can be really good for, especially when you don't have a VOD. Because normally people don't even think to review the game when they don't have a VOD, but having actual notes from your thought process, oh mate, you can just look at that and pinpoint specifically this. I was getting hit by Falco Fair, and then you can remember that exact situation that was happening during the game, and that's time to reflect. It's also really helpful for being able to take your thought process and take that to the player you're playing against or another top player and talk about it there. Really, it's just pinpointing what you were thinking about, and you can analyze how you were thinking about the game during the game. And that's really helpful, acting as a footnote for just analyzing your gameplay, really. So that's all well and good. But one niche aspect about note-taking that I feel people forget is that the act of taking notes is taking a break. So also tell me how many times this has happened to you mid-set. You lose a last hit scenario, a tournament winner. You double jumped from ledge and you got back aired and died. And you're like, fuck, right? You're sitting there, you're like, I shouldn't have lost this game. You go over to them, you do this type of thing, you run it back, go straight into the next one, and you're frustrated. You're on tilt, okay? You're completely out of it. And that's why just being able to review your notes mid-set or write some small things that happened, it forces a 30-second break in between the next game. So you're not on that tilt or that frustration of trying to run it back immediately. That break is resetting the mental. It allows for you to well, hang on. All right, that game was really close, but let's stop and think for a second. All right, what am I going to have to do next game to be able to pull this back? And that refresh of the mental, especially in close game fives or clutch scenarios, is really sometimes to be the difference maker in just having a break, That's in-game note-taking. That's all well and good. But what about out-of-game note-taking, right? Once you have all these notes and information, what are you going to do with it outside the game? Or how do you even take notes when you're not in the game? Well, the first thing is that it is the perseverance of knowledge. So just like school, right? By writing things down, it is only for you to recall them at a later point, since that you can't remember everything all the time, right? It's like a second brain almost. So it's really helpful in when you're doing VOD analysis at home. As you're going through things, you can write things down and like, what did I take away from this, right? You've got there in writing. It's also really helpful with talking with top players. Like there's so many times where I'm just having discussions about Smash, about, you know, the game with people in my local community, or just thinking about it myself. And I could just write those things down, because how many times have you like been coached by a top player and just forgot until the next time you played? And what was that concept I was trying to implement? It's just so easy to just bookkeep all this knowledge you're trying to work on. And it streamlines, you know, where all the information has to be that you need to recall to actually apply in your gameplay. It's also really helpful in acting as a footnote for going into matches, like matchup or specific players, what you need to work on after your analysis, right? It's just there. It's knowledge. It's your second brain. It's remembering stuff so you don't have to remember it yourself. And it is so needless that you can forget so many things. Why not just write it down? So now that we know how to take notes outside the game and inside the game, or how they're useful, how do we actually use them or take good notes? Hear me out for a second, right? We're going to ramble off a few things that you may have heard before and you might cringe about it, but just hear me out. Mind maps, fellas. How do we use mind maps? One central idea in the middle and you got the poppy things everywhere else, right? It's just visualizing how things connect with each other. And that could be really helpful in trying to write out a concept or explaining your ledge trapping flowchart. A personal method I like to use quite a lot is the outline method. And that's where you have main idea, sub-idea, sub-idea, sub-idea. And then under each sub-idea, you've got sub-sub-idea, sub-sub-idea, and so on. It's very structured, it's hierarchical, and it allows me to write things as I will and how things relate to each other. I especially find that useful during the game, writing quick scribbles or the development on problem solving I'm having against my opponent, right? It's like, I keep getting hit by Falco Fair, sub-ideas for how to deal with Falco Fair. Maybe I should hold shield, maybe I shouldn't dash in, maybe I should anti-air before he gets to Fair. One other system that might also be a bit helpful is the Cornell notes system, where similar to the outline system, it's got some structure with main ideas, but it also has ideas for summarizing things. Really, it's just whatever is your preference at the end of the day, right? I would recommend to use diagrams on top of that. Now, if you've tuned into the Mars stream before, you would have seen my beautiful MS Paint drawings as I shockingly draw a sage and some resemblance of a character in form of a stick figure. But it's really helpful in just visualizing a scenario. And visualization, I mean, that's what the game is, right? Like, just showing like where characters move at specific points and the distance between them. It's all helpful for just demonstrating concepts that you're trying to understand. When we are in game, right, I generally like to structure my notes as problem, solution, problem, solution, problem, solution, right? Falco Fair, shield, jump, so on, right? It's just general things to remember, right? And when you're in the game or out of the game, right, you want to be in full clarity for what you're writing something down, right? It doesn't have to be this long, full-on sentence of explaining why this interaction worked. If I'm just getting hit by Falco Fair, I just write Falco Fair, shield more, right? And then when I'm going into the game, I'll be like, I gotta shield Falco Fair more, right? You can shorten long explanations or general ideas of concepts into like a few words, and that's exactly the thing you need to remember heading into that next game to trigger that whole thought process and discussion you've written down before, right? Now we know how to take notes. Sick. How do we make use of our notes, or how to correctly game from them? And I'm going to be pulling through a full few techniques from schooling that you may or may not have heard before. But the first thing, or if there's one thing you need to take away from anything I've talked about today, is to review your notes, please. They are a learning tool. There is literally no point in recording something if you don't look back on it. What is the point? There's none. It's information for you to learn and understand, and if you don't ever look at it ever again, you're not going to learn it. It's as simple as that. And a lot of Smash is becoming familiar and understanding unique situations, by which more time you need to think about the game. You just need to think about the game. And it helps a lot with the notes that you've curated. You can reflect back on your thoughts on the game, you know? So how do we reflect back, or how do we correctly try and, take away from these notes, right? One technique is the fireman technique. And that's where you hypothetically get a 5-year-old who's got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And they go, "Oi, what are you talking about?" And then you explain the concept to them. You got to explain it in the simplest way that even a 5-year-old can understand. And that's how it really ties in with something like active recall, which is another technique. Explaining things in your own words, where you show your understanding and you don't parrot what you've heard from someone else, right? You're explaining it in your own way. Can I explain this? How well do I understand this, for that someone else who doesn't understand it can understand what I'm saying? And that just ultimately allows for the critique and analysis of your own thought process and understanding of concepts in the game already. Simple things just like putting away your notes, writing it out yourself, helps you remember it as well. It just gets you more involved in the concepts and understandings of the game that you're trying to get your head around, right? Make sure to pose specific questions in your notes as well. The more detailed or nuance in your response just leads to greater depth and understanding as well. And ultimately, at the end of the day, by needing to reflect, remember, and implement the step-by-step things that you've note taken, will allow for active steps in your improvement in your gameplay. And that's what we want at the end of the day. By making an intentional effort, by doing specific thought out techniques and ways to learn, you can definitely improve the gameplay to a higher standard. That's all from me. I'm Masked, and if you've enjoyed this type of content, like, subscribe, comment, I don't know, and I'll see you soon.